Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to my weekly email newsletter, Friday Focus. Each Friday, I focus on one topic with one action arising. The link to sign up is in the show notes, or head over to amyrowlandson.com and sign up right now. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Karin Volo. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy. I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, it's been a long time coming. I know I say this a lot with my guests because it is a case of we have a chat and then it's a few months before we then get to record. But this has been over a year. So it's a real treat to have you on the show today.
Yeah, and it's more than something I'm grateful for to be here. It's been a crazy year for me, to be sure.
Fabulous. Well, it's great to have you. And thank you to Barbara Moynihan for the introduction. Barbara was my guest on episode 337, Focus on Doing. And it's wonderful because now, having spoken to you, you've then made some suggestions and introductions as well. And so the ripple effect continues. The Focus on Why ripple effect is ever increasing, which is great. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. And it's one of those things that is so important. So I'm sure people are very drawn to it because everybody needs to know what their why is and why they're here.
Absolutely. Well, let's kick off the conversation with what is it you're focusing on at the moment?
Love that question. My theme in my life and my purpose is bringing joy to the world and joy to the workplace. So my focus is always around joy. This year, as I mentioned, has been a bit of a doozy because at the beginning of 2023, I was actually diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and had to have my life turn around or upside down in about 48 hours and make, gazillion decisions, and went through a pretty crazy journey. I used alternative medicine, or integrated medicine, I should say, because I did do the chemo route, but I also did a lot of other things on top of it and in addition to that. And I'm happy to say now, after 6 months, I was declared cancer-free. I knew that was going to be the result. I just knew it, deep down inside of my gut. And it's been a journey. And so now I'm on my way back and coming back and feeling strong and feeling really good and positive, and just have gotten a much deeper level of understanding of life, and really had to focus in on kind of the physical aspect in the physical body this year, which is not something that was new for me. I mean, it was something I hadn't focused on so much before.
Yeah, it's incredible how much we take for granted when we just have all of the things going okay with our body physically. And then when there's an alteration there, it does stop you in your tracks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been interesting because I have been working in kind of personal growth, self-awareness, teaching leaders for over a decade. My focus is bringing joy to the workplace. So I work with culture and about leadership development and building trust. And I mean, I had a huge toolbox of tools. So I could handle this crisis that came into my life really well and used so many of the tools that I teach people through the emotional state, the mental state, and kind of the spiritual state. But I didn't really have the tools and the things for the physical state as much. It's not something that, like you said, I had really focused in on. I mean, I've always eaten healthy and I've always exercised and all of those basic things. But I really had to tune into the body because when before I got diagnosed, I was quite sick and getting worse and worse and not knowing what it was and not listening to my body and just saying, oh, I can get through this. It'll get better. It'll get better. It'll get better. And I just kept getting worse and worse and trying to figure out what is going on. And so part of this big journey for me was really tuning into the body. Like I listened to my body and say, what do you want to eat? What does it feel like? And just really listening in. And if I'm tired now, it's like I rest because I know I need to rest. It's not like, oh, I'm going to keep going, Fortunately, I sleep really well. That's one of the key things people need. And I know a lot of people don't sleep well. But, that's like one of the key things. And you really need to listen to your body when you're tired or when you're hungry or when you have a craving for something. Now, don't go overboard. I mean, I used to eat chocolate all the time, and I cut out sugar immediately when this whole thing started happening, because sugar is something that feeds cancer cells. So it was a huge journey in learning and growing and really focusing in on being very proactive and not giving my power away to the doctors, and being more of a, how do you want to say it, rallying a team together versus letting them decide over my body what they wanted to do.
Yeah. And it is, you mentioned about cutting out the sugar, and it takes something as drastic as cancer before you realize just what toxins you are putting into your body.
Well, here's the funny thing, Amy. I had been getting kind of this, I get intuitive hits or whatever, and it was just like a little ding. And to me, chocolate was a vitamin. I ate a little bit every day, and it was just like part of my, after a meal, I'd have a little bit of chocolate. And I just kept getting this, like, oh, you need to really reduce sugar, reduce the sugar. And I didn't listen to that, and I've dealt with this intuitive messages that I just have kind of ignored in my life many times. And it's like, if it comes in whispers, and if you don't listen to the whispers, it gets louder. And it's like, eventually it's the 2x4 that knocks you out. And it's like, unfortunately, cancer was one of those 2x4s that did knock me out. I don't think it was only based, because I was eating sugar regularly and all those types of things, but it was, there's always a bigger purpose to these catastrophes and crises that happen in your life. And so much of it is on how you deal with it. It can really demolish you, or it can make you stronger, and it can make you more resilient. And it's a choice. It's a conscious choice that people can take when they make that decision. And that's definitely where I was. I was in that space of making a conscious choice of, I'll get through this. It'll be fine. This is, yes, this is something I have to go through as well with everything else I've gone through in my life. But I just knew I would make it. And the interesting thing is, because I've had many family members that have had cancer and have passed, I think that having the disease versus having a loved one having the disease, it's a whole different dynamic. And so for me, it was really kind of an enlightening thing, like, oh, wow, it's not as scary when you're the one going through it, because it's your body, what's going on. And yes, there are scary things to it, but it was interesting for me to kind of be to have the shoe on the other foot for that. And then to also see the loved ones around me, like my daughters, who hadn't had that kind of experience before, to see, how they were dealing with it. Because I could totally relate to where they were. I'd been in their shoes before.
Yeah. I have a feeling that if we had this conversation when we were due to have it, it would have been a different conversation. We would have talked about purpose in a different way. You just mentioned that we always have a bigger purpose as a result of the catastrophes and the crises that we face. And I'm a big believer in anyone who is very clear around their purpose has had a catalyst at some point. What has shifted for you in terms of purpose from before to where you are now, if at all?
I gave a lot of thought to this. Obviously, when you're faced with your mortality and all of that kind of stuff, you do some deep thinking. And I had several months to think about this. My purpose is pretty much still the same. I did the purpose work in 2011, when I kind of discovered my purpose and really defined it. I did a number of different types of exercises. It's actually a program that I've done, developed to help people as well for finding their purpose. But I'll back up there, because that catalyst was also like a huge shift in my life. And I'll just give you the kind of the quick story on that. But so back in 2006, I went on a business trip to the US, and I live in Sweden now, but I'm half Swedish, half American. And I was working with a business mentor. Back then I had an executive search firm. I was ready to expand out through Europe, and had this most amazing week. Everything was on top of the world. I was having clients calling in. It was just great. Everything was falling into place. And then as I was getting ready to board the plane to come home, there were two US Marshals that kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "We have a warrant for your arrest," and took me into custody. And all of this was due because my first husband, who I had divorced 6 years earlier, had used my name. When I moved to Sweden, I discovered he had lied to me from day one of everything. And he was very abusive. And I'd come to Sweden after he'd been convicted of fraud. And started researching him and found out, talking to, family members and ex-wives and things like that, like, oh my gosh, who on earth did I marry? It was like, it just totally turned my world upside down. And so I proceeded to go into a high security jail in downtown San Diego, where I stayed there for 1,352 days. So that crisis in my life was like such a huge learning journey in an incredibly dark environment. And when I talk about the tools, I learned a lot there on how to stay in a positive frame of mind. So I was visualizing, I was meditating, I was, doing all sorts of different types of things and reading all these self-help books where, they have all these exercises and people often read them and then they'll come back to them. Well, I actually had the time to do all the exercises. So the things that worked for me, I like really integrated into working on a regular basis. So sometimes I call that my spiritual boot camp. It was just trying to keep my head above water and trying to stay in a positive frame of mind. Bottom line with that whole ordeal, which was almost 4 years, is that my charges were dropped. They were trying to extradite me to Mexico because my first husband had used my name on documents down there. So it was just a nightmare situation. But my charges were dropped. I was completely exonerated and released and got to come home and come back to Sweden. And, the toughest part of that was missing my daughters, growing up, because they were 6 and 8 when it started. So I missed a good chunk of their childhood, which was devastating and can't make up that time ever. We have a fabulous relationship now, and they've turned into beautiful young women, and I'm very proud of, all the things they're accomplishing now. So it made us, as a family, very close. During that time, I wrote children's books, and they were bringing joy to the world. And so the theme started to come up. And so when I came home and I mentioned I started to do all this purpose work and try to figure out, what the heck did I just go through and why did I go through that and what was all that for? I worked a lot with forgiveness. I did, a lot of inner growth and self-development. And basically I made a very conscious choice. I'm not going to be ashamed of this. I am a survivor. I got through that situation, and I'm just going to use it in some way. And so it became a catalyst. And that was really what started me on my life's purpose of working with developing people. And I made a choice to work in the corporate world because that's where I'd always worked. I'd always worked with executive search. And I also knew, and this is, talking about listening to your intuition or your guidance, whatever you want to call it. But I knew that I couldn't go back to the headhunting. I knew that I was meant to teach things I had learned, and I just had no idea how I was going to do that. Fast forward a little bit, I ended up writing a business book called Engage, and that opened up doors that I, had no idea, but because I was so on purpose, it was like, okay, public speaking, I'll do that. If I need to do that, I have to get this message out. And so it just led to developing my life's work. So when this situation with the whole cancer came up, that's why I said, I could handle it. I had tools. I've been teaching these tools for a decade on how to, deal with uncertainty and deal with, your state of mind and your emotional state of being and how you want to really thrive. And so I could handle it. And I did really well. And one of my biggest tools is working with gratitude. And I use it as a tool. It's a conscious, deliberate choice of working with that. And it was, gratitude has been something that has been life transforming. I've always worked with it. Even in those really difficult years, it was like every night before I went to bed, I'd think of 3 things I was grateful for. And for my daughters, it was the same thing. Every night, talking about what are they grateful for. And so that just became, a very conscious tool, and probably the biggest one that I worked with in terms of, the tools going through this cancer journey, because it just really made me focus in on, regardless of what's going on in your life, you can always find things to be grateful for. So long-winded answer to what the catalyst was, but, and it's funny because it's like another catalyst in my life. And I'm in the process now of, trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with this one? And I'm looking at developing a program and what I did to just share on how I overcame stage 4 cancer and the tools that I work with, to, help people in that regard as well. I'm not there yet. So you've caught me in the process of kind of unfolding what it'll be, but I think it'll be definitely something, like you said in the beginning, adding another layer to where I've been in my life.
Wow. And I feel that there's even a stronger connection because I'm currently writing my book on purpose, which I'm co-writing with my grandfather, who died back in 1996, but he kept a journal. He called it a commonplace scrapbook for the almost 5 years that he spent as a prisoner of war. Now, understanding that in captivity, you can be free this is so much what I'm hearing from you, that even though you were incarcerated for that exceptionally long period of time, as you said, all those days, 1,352, did you say? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
count it every day, believe me.
I can imagine. Well, I can't imagine, but I can understand that why you would do that. And so I can see this sort of parallel of understanding, looking for as you said, the gratitude in what is it that I'm here to learn? What is it that this particular moment in time is teaching me? As opposed to the blame and the anger and not, taking yourself down a spiral. You were kept very clear, and as you said, you were not just reading those books. You had the time to do the exercise, and that's something that I find is so key. That there's so much knowledge and information out there, and it's all very well to read something and to reflect on it, but unless then you take the action, that's the critical part for me, is to take that intentional action thereafter. It's of no value.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the spiral, because I have a tool I developed called the joyometer, and it's a spiral down and a spiral up. It's like two spirals on top of each other, and it's all about the emotional scale that we as human beings experience. And we have this beautiful, huge range of emotions. And the negative ones are all based in fear. And that's basically, you're forgetting everything is all right. And then the positive emotions, which is, optimism and hope and love and joy and all of those are in a state of love, which for me is, um, living our values every day, or living on vibrant energy. And you have a choice, and it's kind of the choice between fear and love. And if you can stay 51% or more in the positive emotions, then you're going to be having a pretty joyful life. And so that was a tool that I worked a lot with during the years in jail. And then also the two things that I found that help us to shift out of the negative emotions, because when we use the words I am, and then I am mad, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm depressed, whatever. And those are so powerful. Those two words create our life. And so when you can actually take a step back and say, I'm having this emotion, what am I feeling? And you label it, you give yourself enough space to be able to say, okay, I'm feeling sad. How long do I need to feel sad for? Let me process this. And when you can process the emotions cleanly out of your body, they don't get stuck. And it's those stuck emotions, if you suppress emotions, it's like, that's what eventually will cause disease one way or another. And so, dealing with your emotional state is really, really important. And finding a way to get yourself into those positive emotions can be challenging. But the two most important things are, you have to have hope, which for me is, basically happiness, optimism, positive energy, and enthusiasm, and basically moving things forward. You want to have some hope and some, light there at the end of the tunnel. And then the other thing is gratitude. Gratitude is the fastest, easiest way to get yourself out of that state of, those negative emotions. And I see so many people nowadays, and particularly younger generations, that are just steeped into anxiety and, mental health issues and all of those things. And, I'm not, how do I say this? I'm absolutely validating that what they're going through is real, but they need to learn, and they need to have the self-awareness to know that they can actually manage that. And how do you manage that? And that's the self-awareness, and bringing in those tools that can help you to get to a different state of mind.
And what I want to just sort of pick up on is the description of emotions as being negative and positive, because and emotions I believe are all useful in the moment. It's when you hold on to something that is out of the moment that then you could say that they could be deemed as not helpful, to describe them in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, we use those terms, positive and
Yeah.
negative. Every emotion is important, and it helps us to grow. And it's also basically that emotional awareness, that EIQ basically is where you can start to master your life and master how you're feeling about things. And that's not to deny those negative emotions at all. They're here to teach us something. They're here to help us grow. And when you can learn to process emotions in a clean way, and I call it clean in the sense that we're not adding a story to it, putting the trauma to it and keeping the drama alive. Human beings are the only species that can replay a situation over and over in their head, and we go through the pain over and over and over again because we're playing it in our imagination, in our mind. One thing I heard recently, which to me was like a light bulb going off, is when you've gone through something traumatic, when you actually take the time to write it down on paper, it shifts the place that you're thinking about it in your brain to a more logical, analytical space. And so you can process it without having the emotions there as much. So I've always journaled, that's just something that I do. And so for me, whenever I get overwhelmed with emotions, it's like I just pour it all out into the journal. And then it's like, oh, it's out. Okay, it's out of me. And I didn't realize how much that was a shift in the brain. So I love the neuroscience and how the brain works, because that helps us to kind of feel like we can be in control of, our emotional state a little bit better.
And did you journal the whole time that you were in prison?
There, it actually became letters that I was writing. And yes, I was journaling and writing. And the funny thing is, I have a book. It's called My Memoirs, 1,352 Days. But I couldn't write the book while I was there. I knew I was going to write a book, but I couldn't write it while I was there because it was like, I didn't know the ending. I had to know the ending. And the same thing happened now with this whole cancer journey. It was like, I had to know the ending. I kind of knew the ending, what it was going to be, but I had to know that it was actually reality, if that makes sense. So we'll see, there may be a book that comes from this as well, because there were so many synchronicities and amazing experiences that it's like, okay, again, something bigger is happening here than just me and my little life going through and having to deal with this.
And I just wanted to find out why it took so long before you were released and exonerated.
It was in Mexico. So I was in the States and they were trying to send me. And I just said, no, I'm not going, because I knew that's a totally different system. And I was very afraid to go into that whole system, that it was going to take a long time. So it took that long for the judge to get it in front of him. And when the judge in Mexico, and when he got it in front of him, he actually closed the case out and said this should have never been a criminal case. And it took like another 6 weeks for that information to get back to the US. And it was messy. It was just, kind of fell through the legal cracks in the legal system there. But for whatever reason, it took the time that it did, unfortunately. But, again, I learned a lot during that time and have used it as a catalyst to do something positive with my life, which, a lot of people don't do that because they don't look at things in that way, which I think is a lost opportunity for them. Coming back to purpose, I also heard recently, if you can find a specific purpose, that's great. And that's like some of the things that I work with, and I think you work with as well, is helping people find their purpose, right? But if you just need a general purpose, because sometimes people can be overwhelmed, like, I don't know, why am I here? I don't know. I found a generic purpose that I thought, oh, that's brilliant. We're here to grow and to give. And it's like, wow, okay. So if we understand everything that happens, not to us, but for us, and what can we learn from that situation, then we're growing. And then eventually we'll get to the point where we can take those lessons and maybe do something with it or help others in some way, and we all have a unique opportunity to reach our full potential. And then the question is, how do we want to do that? And that's the beauty of being a human being, because we can figure that out and we can have all sorts of different types of experiences, and we're all unique. Whatever billion, what are we, 8 billion something on the planet, we're all totally unique. And I think we need to celebrate our differences and then know that we're all having this amazing experience as human beings. And what are we going to do with it? That's up to each individual on their own.
And there is that sort of panic that people feel that they don't have a purpose defined in that essence. And so they go through this crisis of existential living, what is it that's what I'm supposed to be doing? And I think the biggest myth for me to stamp out is that you don't find it. You create it, you craft it, you build it, you grow with it. And then that way, there's a pressure that's dropped of this eternal search for this most amazing thing that people feel is, because they do see other people who have a very clear defined purpose, such as yourself, and they think, oh, how do I find mine? And that's the problem, is they're looking for it instead of actually working on it.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I think it's a process of discovery as well. It's unfolding and seeing the themes that are in your life, the patterns that have taught you something. And there's lots of different ways to figure that out. But I think I agree with you. It doesn't have to be this huge, humongous thing that you're going to go out and change the world because of this. Some people have that, but being a mom, or being a father, or being, a good spouse, or whatever the case might be. Those are very fantastic purposes as well. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be like you have to go out and impact gazillions of people. You can just impact your family.
Absolutely. And I make that point of starting. That's where I started, was I recognized that my husband was ill, and it was a case of we need to sort this out. And it started very local for me, as in within the household. And then as I've been able to sort out immediate things, and we've worked on that, then we're in the position to go out and help more people. And as you say, it is that to grow, and I say serve, but give, that is essentially the same thing. But it is to be able to serve others, and you get that fantastic. I say there's no such thing as altruism, because you get a lot from it. You get a lot from serving and helping and giving and volunteering in different ways. So yeah, absolutely. If you want to grow it, perfect. If not, and you've got your small community that you believe is you're serving your purpose, that is equally, okay. You don't have to be this big global shift at all. It's fine. I want to ask you, so you use the sort of phrase of discovering and defining your purpose in terms of the purpose work that you did. You mentioned it again there about this discovering, and it is, I do feel that there is a connection with the words that you use with purpose. So explain a bit more about the discovering and the defining for you.
Well, for me, it was really the unfolding of doing the I call it the inner work, the self analysis and the self awareness, and looking back at like the patterns of my life. So when joy kind of came up, um, I looked back and I thought, wow, I used to sell perfume door to door, and I would go in and I just want to make people smile and smell good, right? That was like my first job out of college. And then I got into headhunting, and then I got kind of known because back in the day, we used to actually tell jokes to each other, like instead of like watching comedy or whatever. And so I'd always have a joke. And so people would like always take my call because they know I'd make them laugh. And so there was this theme going on. And I think for me, joy is something that comes from inside. So it's happiness infused with love. So happiness for me is something external. Joy is something that comes from the inside. And so all of these things, when I was reflecting back on my life, it was like, oh yeah, there is a common theme with everything I've done. Um, and like I love to paint. That gives me and brings me so much joy. So it's like just doing things that, whether they're hobbies or your passions or whatever the case might be. It's really looking at those patterns and when you decide to start diving into this to figure out what your purpose is, or to, build or work on the purpose, it's like you're making a conscious choice and trying to find what are the common threads in my life through the different situations I've gone through. And then you start to identify things. And for me, it's what are your passions and what are your talents? And it's kind of combining all these different things that you put together, and then, finding the words that really resonate, that kind of are the essence of who you are. And, I did an exercise years ago, and on my website, if you go, you'll see I have 3 words there. It's inspiration, joy, and evolution. And those were like the core words that feel like that's the essence of who I am. And I haven't changed them. I mean, they may change in the future. I don't know. But it's like those words really resonated with me. And inspiration is because I just, I was in so many years in a dark environment. I wanted to only be with inspirational information, inspirational um, people, and I wanted to inspire others and to be inspired. So that was really big. Joy, because I wanted to have this happiness in my life regardless of what's going on in the circumstances. And then evolution is because we're constantly evolving. So my company's name is Evoloshen. It's spelled a little bit differently, but it's because I believe we're all on this journey. We're constantly developing and growing, and that goes for organizations as well. And so it's like finding those keywords that really resonate with you, and then using that to help build whatever the purpose might be.
And whenever you mention the word joy, for me, it feels as though this is a living, breathing thing, or even a person. It feels like it's a whole entity in itself, the way that you describe her. I just feel like it's your partner in crime. Well, not crime. Let's not use that word.
No.
But maybe that was the thing, that the crime brought you this beautiful joy.
Yeah, that's interesting because that is where I received kind of the children's books that I've written, and they're beautiful, books that help my daughters who were young at that stage, like learn kind of a lot of these tools and concepts that I was diving into myself. And I've only published half of them actually. I wrote like 24, 25 books while I was there, and I have, like 12 of them on Amazon. But um, yeah, so for me personally, joy is really this, living entity because it's so much a part of my life and so much a part of my purpose and mission and what I'm doing and how I want to impact and touch people's lives.
Yeah, I really feel it. Every time you've mentioned joy, the word, bringing joy to the world, bringing joy to the workplace, and just the actual expression, the way that you embody that word really does feel as though she I keep saying she, I don't know why, but she does have this life of her own. It's amazing. So tell me more about what's next for you, Karin.
So, as I mentioned, I did a lot of thinking during the last several months, and I'm definitely going to continue my work with culture and leaders. And one of the things I used to talk about a lot were the three pillars of culture, which was engagement, purpose, and trust, right? So, I started with engagement, and then I realized, okay, companies have to have this bigger purpose, and the companies that have defined a bigger purpose, and that's great. They attract the right people. And then I realized, okay, I got pulled into this trust work because I worked a lot, with the neuroscience of leadership and trust, basically. And so I created a leadership development with that. And then part of my journey was taking this um, from just leaders and dealing with, executive teams or managers and companies. When the COVID years came and we were all locked down, I actually shifted online very quickly with the business because we had already done a lot online. I have a lot of programs available online. And then I started working with and all the employees in the culture learning these things about the neuroscience of trust. And it was interesting because it really super boosted the culture of the company. And so now, these last few months, this year, I've actually come to the conclusion that there's four pillars, and the fourth pillar is caring leadership. Because I also have a podcast called the Amazing Leader Series, but in that, and all these CEOs that I've interviewed who are, phenomenal CEOs, they truly care about people. And I just found that we truly need to come down to caring about each other. Trust is actually a result from caring. So if you have, leaders that truly care about the people and the company, guess what? Everything else is going to build on top of that really easily. So that's kind of my space now is working a lot with leaders, focusing in on that aspect to build the rest of it as well, because it really comes down to that. And what I'm focused on next is really, continuing the work that I've been doing it, but now also adding another dimension and level. And as I mentioned, I think I'll probably do a program or a course around, just the health aspect, the physical aspect of what I did to overcome these things. And then from there, have it available so I can capture kind of my journey and the learnings there as well.
So with your four pillars, I just want to sort of ask you what sort of sits at the foundation and what sits on top of them.
That's a really good question because I used to define it as a little bit of a pyramid, and that trust was the core underlining thing. And I would probably continue with that and put caring leadership underneath if we were going to go with like the visual of a pyramid. But I think for me, all four are very important. So I kind of have them kind of parallel to each other, all in a row because I think they're all essential. But like it's hard to do focus in on one part of this when you don't have the caring leadership, or if you don't have that purpose, but you've got to, it's you need all four. When you get all four, that's when great things start to happen organizationally.
Love that. Love that. Brilliant. Karin, it's been a delight, and thank you so much for sharing your story and your focus on why, or your focus on joy, shall we say. Absolutely. It really is a pleasure. How could people get in contact with you or tune into your podcast or check out some of the books that you've written? What's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, so I have my business website is probably the best place because I do a monthly newsletter, and that's if you sign up there, you'll get information. So it's evoloshen.com, and it's evoloshen.com. And then if you go to /gifts, you can get my geometer and you can get some reports and you can get some information there. So I love to give gifts when I speak. I also have karinvolo.com, which is, Karin with an I, KarinVolo.com. Those two websites, I'm on LinkedIn, reach out. That's probably the platform I'm most active on. And I'm happy to serve in whatever ways I can. I give a lot of free content and great resources. We have a lot of great reports on the Evoloshen site. So those are kind of the three best places, I think.
Fabulous. Well, they'll all be in the show notes, those links. So don't worry if you didn't get them down right now. Thank you again, Karin. It's been an absolute joy having you on the show. Do you have some final words for the listener, please?
Great question. And, I just want to reiterate that life happens for us, not to us. And I just know so many people are facing challenging times right now on so many different levels. And there's a lot of uncertainty happening in the world. And I think that the key thing that I've learned this year going through the whole cancer journey is that we have to do our inner work. If you focus on yourself and the power that you have within yourself to heal the traumas and to move things forward and to really visualize the type of life experience you want to have, if we can all focus on that beautiful life that we want to live, I think we can shift the world and kind of move away from a lot of the fear that's we're being bombarded with on a daily basis. So, focus on your sphere of influence, focus on the things you can control, and focus on creating a wonderful life experience that you want to enjoy and have joy in. And I think the rest is going to kind of take care of itself. So that would be my final message, is just focus on the joy.
How has this conversation had an impact on you? What value have you received from tuning in? What are your reflections with actions? Please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcast or Spotify review sharing how Focus on Why has made a difference to you today. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, simply connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.